Hi everyone, throwaway account, because, well, the situation is complicated. I'm a 35-year-old man, and until recently, I thought I had a pretty solid life. I've been married to my wife, Jessica, for 7 years. We've had our ups and downs like any marriage, but nothing I thought we couldn't handle. Until now. It started with small things, you know. Jessica began coming home later than usual, with vague excuses about work meetings running long or needing to catch up with friends. She became more guarded with her phone too. The once casual, "Hey, can you check that notification for me?" turned into a sharp, "It's private." At first, I told myself I was imagining things. Work had been stressful for both of us, and we weren't connecting like we used to. I thought, maybe it's just a rough patch. But then, there was the perfume. A new scent she hadn't worn in years suddenly made a comeback. And not for me. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I loved her, trusted her. But trust can only stretch so far before it snaps. And when it snapped, it was devastating. The moment everything truly began unraveling happened on a Thursday evening. I'd finished work early and decided to surprise Jessica by cooking dinner, something we used to enjoy together before life got too chaotic. I set the table, dimmed the lights, and waited. But 6 p.m. turned into 7 p.m., then 8 p.m. By 9 o'clock, my stomach had soured, not from hunger, but from that gnawing feeling that something was wrong. When she finally walked in, she looked startled, almost as if she hadn't expected me to be there. "Oh, you're home early," she stammered, dropping her purse on the counter. There was lipstick smudged on her teeth, and her hair looked different, not like it had been done for the office. "Late meeting?" I asked casually, though the words felt heavy in my throat. I wanted to believe her answer would ease my doubts. "Yeah, last-minute client crisis," she said quickly, her eyes darting everywhere, but to me. Then came the excuse to end the conversation. "I'm starving. Let me shower first." As she disappeared upstairs, I sat there staring at her purse. My heart raced, the air around me felt suffocating, and I battled myself. Don't do it, I thought. But something inside me wouldn't let it go. So I opened the bag. There was a receipt from some upscale restaurant across town. 2 entrees, 2 cocktails, and a bottle of wine. The timestamp was barely an hour old. I froze, the paper trembling in my hand. My mind raced, piecing together all the oddities of the past few months. Her increased nights out, her sudden preoccupation with her appearance, and how distant she'd become, even when we were together. This was the moment I knew. But I didn't have proof yet. I stayed calm. When she came back downstairs, I didn't mention the receipt. Instead, I smiled, handed her a plate, and we ate in silence. My thoughts churned as I played along, determined not to confront her until I had something she couldn't deny. Over the next few days, I became someone I never thought I'd be. I started keeping track of her movements, her stories, and her moods. I even went as far as placing a small GPS tracker in her car. It felt wrong, but I justified it to myself. If she was lying to me, I had the right to know. I didn't have to wait long. The following Friday, Jessica said she was meeting her friend, Lisa, for a late dinner. Something about the tone of her voice sounded rehearsed. As soon as she left, I opened the app on my phone to track her location. My stomach sank when I saw that I moved not toward Lisa's usual hangouts, but straight to a boutique hotel downtown. I sat there, staring at the screen, shaking. There was no other explanation. And then, as if fate had stepped in, my phone buzzed. It was an Instagram message from Lisa. "Hey, tell Jess I hope she feels better. Missed her at dinner tonight." It hit me like a freight train. Jessica hadn't even bothered to make sure her alibi was solid. That's how careless or confident she'd become. My hands trembled as I texted back a vague, "Thanks, I'll let her know." That night, I didn't sleep. My mind was a storm of anger, betrayal, and disbelief. But as the hours ticked by, I began thinking less about Jessica's lies and more about my next move. If she was going to tear apart my world, I wasn't going to just sit back and take it. I wanted the truth, and I wanted her to know what it felt like to have her life fall apart piece by piece. The morning after Jessica's dinner with Lisa, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my cold coffee. Jessica breezed in, wearing one of those smiles that used to light up my day, but now felt like a mask she wore for her own convenience. She kissed me on the cheek like everything was normal, like she hadn't spent the previous night wrapped up in lies. I couldn't bring myself to look at her. "I'm meeting Lisa again tonight," she said casually as she poured herself some coffee. Her nonchalance felt like a slap to the face. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I wasn't ready to tip my hand yet. I needed more than suspicion. I needed undeniable proof. Instead, I played dumb. "That's nice," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. "She seems like a good friend." Jessica smiled and nodded, completely unaware that I'd already uncovered the cracks in her story. Watching her was like staring at a stranger. I wondered how I had missed the signs for so long, or if she'd always been this good at hiding her secrets. That evening, I decided to follow her. I waited until she left, claiming she was meeting Lisa at their usual spot downtown. As soon as her car disappeared down the street, I grabbed my keys and followed the tracker on my phone. The dot on the screen didn't lead to a restaurant or Lisa's neighborhood. Instead, it stopped at the same boutique hotel as before. I parked a block away and walked toward the hotel, my pulse pounding so loudly in my ears I could barely think. I didn't know what I would do when I got there. Confront her? Cause a scene? I just knew I couldn't sit at home and pretend anymore. When I reached the lobby, I froze. My mind raced with the possibilities of what I might find upstairs. I glanced around, scanning for a sign of her. Then, like fate wanted me to see it, the elevator doors opened, and there she was. She wasn't alone. Jessica stepped out arm in arm with another man, laughing softly at something he said. He was tall, fit, and impeccably dressed. Everything I wasn't after months of working overtime and ignoring my own well-being. Watching them together was like a knife twisting in my chest. She leaned into him the way she used to lean into me. They didn't see me. They walked right past, too absorbed in their little bubble to notice the storm brewing just feet away. I followed them outside and watched as they got into his car, laughing like teenagers sneaking out past curfew. My hands clenched into fists, my entire body trembling with rage. But I didn't make a move. I let them drive off, disappearing into the night like nothing had happened. Part of me wanted to chase them down, but a larger part of me knew that this wasn't the moment to act. I needed a plan. The next day, I called Lisa. It was a gamble, but I figured she might know something, or at least help me confirm what I already suspected. When she answered, I could hear the hesitation in her voice. "Hey Lisa, it's me, Matt," I said, trying to keep my tone casual. "I just wanted to thank you for checking in the other night." There was a pause. "Sure, Matt. Is everything okay?" "Yeah, it's just Jessica's been acting strange lately," I admitted, deciding to test the waters. "She says she's been spending time with you a lot, but something feels off." Lisa sighed heavily. "Matt, I don't want to get involved, but I haven't seen Jessica in weeks. She's been dodging my calls too." Her words were like a punch to the gut, even though I already knew the truth. "Thanks, Lisa. I appreciate your honesty." After hanging up, I sat in silence, trying to process everything. Jessica hadn't just betrayed me. She'd dragged our mutual friends into her web of lies. But I wasn't alone in this mess anymore. Lisa had confirmed what I needed to know, and her frustration with Jessica gave me an idea. If Jessica was going to play games, I'd beat her at her own. The confrontation with Lisa left me shaken, but oddly focused. If Jessica thought she could weave her lies unnoticed, she underestimated me. I wasn't just going to confront her. No, I wanted to dismantle the web she had spun piece by piece. That's when fate introduced me to someone who was just as invested in this unraveling as I was. Her name was Melanie. It started with a text I received out of the blue one afternoon. The number was unfamiliar, but the message cut through me like a blade. "Hi, Matt. My name is Melanie. I think my husband is having an affair with your wife." I stared at the screen, my stomach sinking into an endless pit. Melanie, the man from the hotel. This was his wife. How she got my number didn't matter. The fact that she had reached out did. A wave of relief and dread washed over me. Relief that I wasn't alone in my suspicions, dread that this was confirmation I'd hoped I'd never receive. I texted back, fingers trembling, "We should meet." We agreed on a neutral place, a coffee shop on the other side of town, where neither of us would run into anyone familiar. When I walked in, I spotted her immediately. She was sitting by the window, her hands wrapped tightly around a steaming mug of tea. Her face was pale but composed, and her eyes met mine with a look of determination. This was a woman scorned, like me, and her anger burned just beneath the surface. "Matt," she said as I sat down across from her. "Thank you for meeting me." I nodded, still processing the surreal reality of the situation. "Melanie, I don't know what to say." She leaned in, lowering her voice. "I've known for a few weeks now. My husband, Eric, has been acting strange. Secretive. Distant. I found hotel receipts in his car, and I hired someone to follow him." Her lips trembled as she spoke, but her eyes stayed sharp. "Last night, he was with your wife." Hearing it aloud was a gut punch, even though I'd seen it with my own eyes. I sat back, running a hand through my hair. I've suspected for months. The lies, the distance, the late nights. I followed her to that same hotel yesterday. I hesitated, then added, "I saw them together." For a moment, neither of us spoke. It felt like sitting in the aftermath of an emotional car wreck, the gravity of our shared betrayal sinking in. Then Melanie's expression hardened. "I don't want to just sit here and let them get away with this," she said firmly. "They've lied to us, humiliated us, and treated our lives like collateral damage. If we do nothing, they'll just move on like nothing happened." Her words mirrored my own thoughts. I'd been wrestling with how to handle this, but hearing Melanie voice my anger gave it clarity. "What are you suggesting?" I asked cautiously, though I already knew the answer. "We work together," she said simply. "We find out everything, gather proof, and when the time is right, we expose them to everyone." A thrill of vindication coursed through me. I wasn't alone anymore. Melanie and I could do what I'd been too paralyzed to attempt on my own. I met her gaze, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of control return. "I'm in," I said, sealing the pact. With the pact made, Melanie and I began peeling back the layers of deceit. If we wanted to take down Jessica and Eric's little fantasy world, we had to understand it first. And that meant stepping into their lives in a way neither of us had before. It started small. Melanie had access to Eric's phone records and a decent grasp of his schedule. From her, I learned the times and places he was most likely to meet Jessica. In return, I shared what I knew about Jessica's routines and her increasingly erratic behavior. Together, we formed a plan. I would get close to Eric, and Melanie would do the same with Jessica. We'd infiltrate their lives and gather every piece of dirt we could. My first move was at the gym. Eric was a regular there. According to Melanie, his new obsession with fitness had coincided suspiciously with the start of his affair. I signed up for a membership and began going at the times Melanie said he worked out. It didn't take long to spot him. Tall, muscular, and annoyingly charismatic, Eric seemed like the kind of guy who thrived on attention. Watching him from across the weight room, I felt a deep, simmering anger. This was the man who thought he could take what was mine. One afternoon, as he was loading weights onto a barbell, I made my approach. "Hey, mind if I work in with you?" I asked, forcing a friendly tone. Eric looked up, slightly surprised, then grinned. "Sure thing, man." We fell into easy conversation as we took turns with the weights. I kept my questions casual at first, what he did for work, how long he'd been coming to this gym, but slowly I began steering the conversation toward relationships. Eric, to my surprise, seemed almost eager to brag. He didn't outright admit to cheating, but his sly comments about how married life can get a little stale and how you've got to keep things exciting made his arrogance crystal clear. Meanwhile, Melanie was working her own angle. She began reaching out to Jessica under the guise of wanting to bond over shared interests. Jessica, oblivious to Melanie's true intentions, welcomed the attention. Over coffee and drinks, Jessica let her guard down, painting a picture of herself as a misunderstood wife trapped in a boring marriage. According to Melanie, Jessica even described Eric as her escape. She doesn't even feel guilty, Melanie told me one night over the phone, her voice trembling with anger. She actually thinks she deserves this, like it's some kind of reward for putting up with you. That hurt more than I cared to admit, but it only steeled my resolve. If Jessica and Eric thought they could rewrite the rules of our lives without consequences, they were in for a rude awakening. By the end of the week, Melanie and I had a wealth of information. We knew their favorite meeting spots, their schedules, and even the pet names they use for each other. The less said about those, the better. But more importantly, we had something tangible, proof. Photos, screenshots, and enough surveillance footage to destroy their reputations. The next step wasn't just about exposing them. It was about making them feel the weight of every lie, every betrayal, and every moment they thought they'd gotten away with it. We weren't just going to confront them. We were going to dismantle everything they had built. Once we had the proof, Melanie and I knew it was time to start dismantling Jessica and Eric's little bubble. Confrontation was tempting, but it was too direct. We wanted them to experience the same confusion, humiliation, and pain they'd inflicted on us. It was time to make them question their own footing, inch by inch, piece by piece. Our first move was subtle but effective. Melanie discovered through Eric's text that he and Jessica had been sneaking around using his work as a cover. His boss, a by-the-book type who hated any whiff of scandal, had no idea. Melanie crafted an anonymous email detailing concerning behavior and attached a few select photos of Eric and Jessica entering a hotel together during business hours. It worked better than we could have hoped. Eric called Melanie that evening, furious about a witch hunt at work. He was under investigation, and his boss had put him on unpaid leave pending further review. Melanie played her role perfectly, feigning ignorance and offering him support. Meanwhile, I couldn't help but savor the poetic justice. He had risked everything for a cheap thrill, and now the cracks were starting to show. Jessica was next. She'd been telling her friend she was exploring new opportunities, but hadn't mentioned that her opportunities involved hotel rooms and another woman's husband. Melanie and I started planting seeds among our mutual acquaintances. We didn't lie. We simply asked pointed questions in the right circles. Has Jessica been acting a little off lately? Melanie would say, I've noticed she's not been herself. It didn't take long for whispers to start, and Jessica's carefully curated facade began to crumble. I took a more direct approach. Jessica had always been meticulous about her image, particularly online. She prided herself on her Instagram account, which was full of picture-perfect posts about self-care and cherishing relationships. It made me sick. Using an anonymous profile, I began dropping subtle comments under her photos. Nothing too overt, just enough to rattle her. Under a selfie caption, "Grateful for life's blessings," I wrote, "Does your husband know how grateful you are?" The comment was deleted within minutes, but I knew she saw it. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for, befriending Eric. After weeks of casual encounters at the gym, Eric invited me for drinks. It was a calculated risk, but I agreed. At the bar, he was charming and boisterous, the kind of guy who thought the world revolved around him. As the drinks flowed, he became more candid. He bragged about his side adventures without naming Jessica, but the details were unmistakable. Every word fueled my resolve. Gotta keep things exciting, right? Eric said, grinning like a kid with a secret. I raised my glass, pretending to toast him, while silently promising to bring his house of cards crashing down. The walls around Jessica and Eric's secret world were beginning to close in. Melanie and I had made sure of that. But as satisfying as it was to see cracks forming, we knew we couldn't stop here. The goal wasn't just to shake them, it was to make them fall. Jessica had always been a creature of habit, particularly when it came to her career. She worked in PR and was fiercely proud of her position at a local firm, often touting her ability to fix anything. What Jessica didn't know was that I had access to one of her work devices, a spare laptop she had left at home after setting up a new one. I'd never touched it before. I never had a reason to. But now it was a gold mine. Her email inbox was a revelation. There were confirmations for hotel reservations, detailed messages to Eric about their rendezvous, and even a few rants about how boring her marriage had become. I forwarded every damning email to myself, saving them for later. Then I found something even better, a message from one of her firm's major clients. They were upset about a recent campaign, claiming it had damaged their image and threatening to pull their account. An idea took root. Using an anonymous account, I sent the client a carefully worded message. I thought you'd want to know that the person overseeing your campaign has been involved in some questionable personal conduct. It might explain the lack of focus on your account. The fallout was almost immediate. Jessica came home the next day looking pale and distracted. Work was insane, she muttered, brushing past me. She didn't elaborate, but I overheard her on the phone later, frantically trying to reassure someone, her boss, most likely, that she had everything under control. I almost felt bad. Almost. Meanwhile, Melanie continued to play the perfect, supportive wife. Eric, clueless as ever, vented to her about the bullshit politics at work and how his leave of absence was putting them in a financial bind. Melanie listened patiently, even offering to dip into her savings to help. It's what wives do, right? She told me later, her voice dripping with sarcasm. But behind the scenes, she was relentless. She reached out to Eric's colleagues, planting doubts about his professionalism and hinting at the investigation. It didn't take long for the rumors to spread. Eric's reputation, once spotless, was now under siege. The tension between Jessica and Eric was starting to show. Melanie and I exchanged updates almost daily, sharing details of their unraveling lives. Jessica was no longer her polished, confident self. She jumped at every notification on her phone, and her once flawless social media presence had grown sparse. Eric, too, was faltering. He stopped going to the gym as often and seemed less interested in keeping up appearances. The spark that had fueled their affair was dimming under the weight of real-world consequences. Then came the moment Melanie and I had been waiting for, the first crack in their alliance. Eric confronted Jessica after discovering that one of their favorite meeting spots, a private lounge, had banned him for inappropriate behavior. He didn't realize Melanie had tipped them off about his antics. Jessica, of course, denied any involvement, but Eric wasn't convinced. According to Melanie, their argument ended with him storming out of their usual rendezvous spot and leaving Jessica behind. They're turning on each other, Melanie told me over the phone that night. It's only a matter of time before it all comes crashing down. I leaned back in my chair, letting her words sink in. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something resembling peace. Jessica and Eric had built their relationship on lies, and now those lies were eating them alive. But we weren't done. Not yet. The tension between Jessica and Eric had reached a breaking point, and Melanie and I knew it was time to press the advantage. Subtle sabotage had done its job, and now it was time for the truth to be laid bare. We wanted their lives to unravel in real time, messy, public, and inescapable. Jessica's career was already teetering on the edge. The anonymous tip to her firm's client had caused a ripple effect, and she was under scrutiny from her boss. She spent her days putting out fires, her confidence shattered, while I acted like the oblivious husband she assumed I still was. Every time she sighed or muttered about how stressful work had become, I bit my tongue to keep from laughing. Meanwhile, Eric was unraveling even faster. Melanie told me about the tension at home. The way he snapped at her over minor inconveniences or sulked when she didn't cater to his every whim. His suspension at work had dragged on longer than he expected, and the weight of it was making him reckless. Then came the moment we'd been waiting for. Jessica and Eric had planned another one of their trysts, this time at a quaint little bed and breakfast outside the city. Melanie found the reservation confirmation on Eric's email and forwarded it to me. We both knew this was the perfect opportunity to strike. The day of the rendezvous, Melanie accidentally left her phone unlocked on their kitchen counter, displaying an incriminating message thread between her and me. Eric saw it. The message thread was vague enough to seem harmless at first glance. Mostly conversations about our respective marriages and shared frustrations. But the implication was clear. If Eric didn't suspect Melanie of knowing about the affair before, he did now. Eric confronted Melanie, demanding to know what was going on. She played her role to perfection, feigning confusion and indignation. "You've been distant for months, Eric," she said, her voice trembling just enough to sell the act. "Do you think I don't notice the late nights, the mysterious phone calls? Who is she?" Eric denied everything at first, but Melanie pressed him, accusing him of betraying their marriage. It wasn't long before he cracked, admitting to the affair but swearing it was over. That's when Melanie dropped the bomb. "It's not just me who knows, Eric. Matt knows too." Eric froze. According to Melanie, his face went pale as the reality of his situation sank in. The walls were closing in, and there was no way out. At the same time, I was setting my own trap for Jessica. Armed with screenshots of her messages to Eric, I arranged to meet her at home under the pretense of wanting to talk. When she arrived, she found me sitting in the living room with a folder of evidence spread out on the coffee table. Her face went through a series of emotions: shock, fear, and finally, anger. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "It's everything, Jessica," I said calmly. "Every lie, every betrayal. You and Eric didn't just cheat on us. You destroyed our trust, our lives. Did you think we wouldn't find out?" She sputtered, trying to defend herself, but the weight of the evidence left her no room to deny it. I let her flounder for a moment before delivering the final blow. "I've already spoken to Melanie," I said. "We've known for weeks. The two of you thought you were so clever, but now it's over." Jessica crumbled, falling back onto the couch as tears filled her eyes. I didn't feel the slightest bit sorry for her. She hadn't cried for me when she was sneaking off to meet Eric, and I wouldn't cry for her now. Jessica's tears fell freely, but I didn't feel the empathy I might have once mustered. She was no longer the woman I had trusted, the person I'd built my life with. She was someone who had methodically destroyed everything we'd shared, and now she was facing the consequences. "What happens now, Matt?" she finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms. "What happens now is simple. Everyone finds out." Her head snapped up, eyes wide with panic. "You can't do that. Think about my career." "About your career?" I cut her off, my voice cold. "That's your concern right now? Not what you've done to me. To us," she stammered, but I didn't give her a chance to continue. "I don't owe you anything, Jessica. Not my silence, not my loyalty, and certainly not my protection." I got up and walked away, leaving her to stew in the weight of her own actions. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity and making sure she and Eric couldn't escape the fallout of their choices. Meanwhile, Melanie had her own moment of reckoning with Eric. After their heated confrontation, she made it clear that she wasn't interested in his apologies or excuses. Instead, she began systematically exposing him in the circles that mattered most to him. Eric's workplace, already teetering on the edge of firing him after the anonymous tip about his conduct, became the first target. Melanie sent a carefully crafted email to his boss. "As someone who values professionalism," she wrote, "I thought you'd want to know about the real reason behind Eric's recent absences." Attached were pictures of Eric and Jessica entering the hotel they'd frequented, time-stamped and indisputable. Eric was called into a meeting the next day and left the building with a box of his belongings. Melanie's account of his return home was deliciously ironic. "He had the nerve to act like I'd betrayed him," she told me over the phone, laughing bitterly. "He's a coward, Matt. The moment things get tough, he blames everyone but himself." Jessica's exposure followed swiftly. Using the emails I collected from her work laptop, I anonymously tipped off one of her firm's competitors, an old rival she'd clashed with during a prior campaign. I made sure the emails about her indiscretions found their way into the right hands. Within days, Jessica's boss confronted her during a staff meeting. According to a friend of hers who worked there, the fallout was immediate. She was asked to resign by the end of the week. But the exposure didn't stop at their professional lives. Melanie and I coordinated the ultimate social reveal, a public confrontation that neither Jessica nor Eric could talk their way out of. It was risky, but we were both done playing it safe. They had dragged us through hell, and now it was their turn to face the music. We planned it for a local charity gala, one that Jessica and Eric often attended with their friends and colleagues. Melanie, ever the planner, secured tickets for us. Dressed to the nines, we walked in like we belonged there, determined to end the charade in front of their carefully curated social circle. We waited until Jessica and Eric were deep in conversation with a group of mutual friends. Then Melanie and I approached, each holding envelopes filled with printed screenshots, photos, and emails. Without a word, we handed them out to the group. "What's this?" one of Eric's friends asked, flipping through the evidence. "It's the truth," Melanie said calmly. "About Jessica and Eric. We thought you all deserved to know." The room went silent as realization dawned. Jessica turned bright red, while Eric stammered, trying to explain it away. But there was no explanation that could undo the damage. The evidence spoke for itself. When the evening ended, Jessica and Eric's reputations were in tatters. The people they'd worked so hard to impress now saw them for what they truly were: liars, cheaters, and frauds. For the first time in months, Melanie and I felt a sense of closure. The exposure was complete, but our next steps would be personal. The fallout from the gala was everything Melanie and I had hoped for, and more. The shockwaves rippled through Jessica and Eric's social and professional circles. Their once polished images were irreparably tarnished. Mutual friends avoided them like the plague. Their colleagues whispered behind their backs. And the small worlds they'd worked so hard to build crumbled under the weight of their own lies. For me, the final confrontation with Jessica came a few days later. I came home to find her sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by half-packed boxes. Her face was pale, her eyes red and puffy from crying. I stood in the doorway, watching her for a moment, trying to summon even a shred of pity. I couldn't. "Matt," she started, her voice breaking. I raised a hand to stop her. "Don't," I said firmly. "There's nothing you can say that will fix this." She let out a shaky breath, nodding. "I'm leaving," she said quietly. I figured it's the least I can do. I wanted to tell her that leaving wasn't enough, that no amount of apologies or gestures could erase what she'd done. But instead, I just nodded. "Good." As she stood to leave, she paused at the doorway, clutching her suitcase. "For what it's worth," she said softly, "I never wanted to hurt you." I met her gaze, my voice cold. "You didn't just hurt me, Jessica. You destroyed everything we had, and you didn't even have the decency to feel guilty about it." She flinched at my words, but didn't argue. Instead, she nodded once and walked out the door. I watched her go, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. It was over. Melanie's parting with Eric was far less civil. After Eric was fired from his job, he came home to find that Melanie had changed the locks and packed his belongings into garbage bags on the front lawn. "I didn't bother pretending to care," she told me later. "He didn't deserve a shred of my kindness." Eric begged her for another chance, but Melanie stood firm. "I told him he could try his luck with Jessica," she said with a bitter laugh. "Good luck building a life with someone who's as selfish and deceitful as he is." As the days turned into weeks, Melanie and I found ourselves talking less about Jessica and Eric and more about our own healing. The shared bond that had fueled our alliance was no longer needed. We had won. The aftermath wasn't easy. Moving on felt like trying to rebuild a house after a hurricane, slow, uncertain, and exhausting. But for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. The betrayal had broken me, but it hadn't destroyed me. I started going to therapy, focused on reconnecting with friends I distanced myself from, and even explored new hobbies that brought me joy. Melanie and I stayed in touch for a while, checking in on each other's progress. But eventually, our lives took separate paths. We had been allies in a shared war, but once the battle was over, there was no reason to keep fighting. As for Jessica and Eric, their relationship didn't last long. I heard through the grapevine that they tried to make a go of it, but fell apart within months. Trust, it turns out, is hard to build when it's been born out of betrayal. Looking back, I don't regret what Melanie and I did. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about taking control of our lives and refusing to be victims. If there's one thing I've learned from this, it's that self-respect matters more than trying to hold on to something that's already broken. To anyone reading this who's been in a similar situation, you're stronger than you think. And no matter how dark it gets, there's always a way to rebuild. You just have to take the first step. Thanks for listening. I didn't think writing this out would feel so cathartic, but it does. Life goes on, and so will I. Thank you for listening to my story. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think.